Hello, one and all. Let's get ready to roll some dice because now it's an episode of Top Deck Thoughts. Now, for this episode, we're actually going to be talking about the new D&D set, aka Adventures in the Forgotten Realm Magic the Gathering set, that's coming out mid-July. Now, for the record, they did actually preview some cards just to tease us for the set. They teased it in two veins. They teased it in their big kind of like summer announcement that was a couple of weeks ago, as well as of last Friday of this recording, they also did a little teaser that just essentially profiled one of the more popular characters within the D&D series and such. So, I'm going to actually cover all the cards that have been spoiled so far, just so that we can kind of get a glance, figure out how they work and such, and whether or not they would actually be very good either in Eternal formats or even in Standard, which is my specialty. Now, one thing before we get started. Few things. One, I will be getting a couple more new videos out with Top Deck Thoughts throughout the week, because upcoming tomorrow will actually be the start of spoiler season for Modern Horizons 2, which, speaking of which, I do actually got a preview card, thanks to Wizard of the Coast, that I'll be previewing at 8 o'clock on Monday on June 1st, 8 o'clock p.m. specifically. So, just thought I would get that out of the way. Also, one other thing, for how I'm going to talk about the spoilers through the Modern Horizons spoiler season, you might want to just catch up on my Twitter regarding to my quick 2 cents on the cards that get revealed and such, but I will try to get an in-depth discussion at least every other day. If I can try to get it done daily, I will, but it is a little bit tricky, especially since, working at a job and such. So, something to keep in mind. Nevertheless, now that we got all the upkeep out of the way, let's get started. So, first card we're going to be talking about that got spoiled for the new D&D set is Portable Hole. A 1 mana, aka 1 white artifact. When this enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less until Portable Hole leaves the battlefield. Now, obviously, this is definitely a homage to one of the more popular items within a D&D adventuring party. Usually you use the trap like people or trap monsters and such, or try to get a bunch of gold out of it, essentially. As for the card itself for Magic the Gathering, it's actually a pretty good card, I would say, for a lot of formats, actually. Just a 1 mana destroy, or not even destroy, just exile a specifically annoying non-land permanent that's mana value 2 or less. That doesn't seem much until you consider that a majority of the Eternal formats, especially the fast Eternal formats, a majority of their non-land permanents are within the 1 to 2 mana cost variety. So, at least in Eternal formats, when we go past Standard, this actually hits a lot of things. It hits stuff like Rented Sits, it hits Death Shadow, it pretty much hits all the early 1 or 2 drops that are in the meta, so to speak. So it's kind of like a Fatal Push cross with a Banishing Light, I guess. Now, the catch-22 is it is an artifact, and there are ways to answer the artifacts in Eternal formats, Nature's Claim, etc. And it's also a Portable Hole can, ironically, exile a Portable Hole, which, if you want to go through the quants, pretty much the, how would I phrase it, the little bit irony of that. So if this does get popular enough, you do have to consider the fact that people might be just teching either Artifact Hate, which we do have stuff in the meta, at least if regarding the Standard, as well as I stated before, Portable Hole can exile Portable Hole. I do also like this because it is exile, so it does actually help answer against the more annoying creatures in the format that have semi-indestructibility, aka like if someone tries to protect their creature with Selfless Savior, or like Seasoned Howlblade and such, so this is actually a pretty good answer to that in Standard. Plus, also, for this being so cheap, it actually can be played in Lurrus type builds, so if your opponent does remove it, either with their Artifact Hate or such, you can just play Lurrus on turn 4, play your Lurrus, play Portable Hole again, and then exile the thing that's problematic that's mana value 2 or less. It's definitely going to be interesting to see if this makes a standard dent, but I am definitely curious about this more in the Eternal formats. As for Standard, it does have a chance, I'm not going to deny that. The power level of the card is pretty good, but on the other hand, we are in a format where a majority of creatures are in the free drop range. There's definitely, I would say in Standard, this might be a card that would either be temporary main board or just sideboard only until you realize you're going against a Weenies deck, aka a bunch of 1 to 2 drops, swing in for lethal and such, then you might actually get some benefit out of Portable Hole. Also, one other thing you need to keep in mind with Portable Hole. This does also answers tokens relatively well, so if you go against like a tokens build that their main premise is like to make a Giant Shark Typhoon token of some sort, Portable Hole easily answers it, so, or any more aggressively oriented tokens. So, something to keep in mind. Next up, Power Word Kill. 1 in the black for an instant, destroy target non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon creature. Okay, obviously this isn't all mods to a very powerful spell that pretty much, if you... pretty much is a classic spell of liches, which you don't want that to hit you if you're not ready for it. Let's just put it like that. As for the spell itself in Standard, this is where I'm going to get into a little bit of a... I think it's good, but I don't think it's like the Doomblade / Heartless Act that everybody thinks it is. And here's the reason why. First off, yes, this does kill a lot of things potentially in the format. At least if we're talking about current Standard. Like, there's a lot of early game creatures that are non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon creatures. There's a ton. And this has the answer to pretty much answer some early game to even mid-game creatures just for 2 mana. Very nice. However, there are ways to play around this. Like, you could say, for example, if your opponent is playing Changelings or playing like Masquerade Nexus, then they can actually make all the creatures all creature types, then this spell becomes pretty much unversatile whatsoever. But that's kind of fringe, so and such. So you think, well, that's very fringe. I don't think then that doesn't really downplay the spell value, right? You would think so, but then there's the second issue with this card, which is one of the more popular creatures in Standard at the moment are dragons. Like, we're talking about the dragons from Strixhaven. We're talking about Goldspan Dragon. Like, dragons are a very popular creature archetype, and we are coming into a set with D&D where we're probably going to get more dragons. I mean, heck, we're even going to be talking about a dragon that's been spoiled so far. So this is a card that I think will be good, like, early game, but the problem is, once people start playing the dragons or changelings and such, then this becomes less effective. Now, you would make the argument that, well, maybe post-rotation it gets a lot better, because then we lose Heartless Act, we lose Eliminate and stuff like that, and this is probably our quintessential 2-mana spell to remove stuff. Which, I can see that argument, but there is stuff like, for example, the Foretell kill spell that allows you to scry when you foretell it that I think is a lot better. Plus, I think this card will get less effective post-rotation, mostly due to the fact that, well, we're pretty much the sets we're going to be rotating into is the next 2 Innistrad sets, aka Crimson Vows, as well as Midnight Hunt. And yes, they are thematically going to be the Werewolf set and the Vampire set, so technically Power Word Kill can kill vampires and they can kill werewolves, so if those archetypes do get popular enough, then this might be very effective. However, Innistrad is also known for not only vampires and werewolves, they're also known for angels. Boop. They also are known for demons. Boop. They're also known for devils. Boop. And there are times where you do see a dragon in Innistrad. Boop. So, if we get any of those creature types that are a lot more effective within the Standard meta, at least regarding to power level and such, then the power level of this card kind of gets a little bit lowered, if you get my drift. However, there is also the factor that they're pretty much with the set upcoming, we might get new tribal archetypes that synthesize that we have seen with Kaldheim. Like, there was the emphasis to do giant tribal, there's the emphasis to do pretty much elf tribal, stuff like that. So maybe then Power Word Kill gets effective, but then the other tribe that they emphasize a lot is Angel Tribal, which if we get more better angels with Innistrad, then yeah. This is a card where I think it's going to be very, very, very dependent on the card list of the meta regarding to Standard and such, as well as it's going to be very dependent on the popular kind of like creatures that are played within the local meta. Like, within this current meta, it would feel really good, because you can kill, like, Bone Crusher Giant, you can kill, essentially, Skyclave Apparitions. There's a lot of creatures, like I said, you can kill. with the exception of Goldspan Dragon and Strixhaven Dragons. That's pretty much the only exception. And the one time you go against like Angel Tribal and you're like, uh-oh. That being said, I think the card will see at least a little bit of play, at least temporarily mainboard or sideboard, but it is definitely one of those that I'm going to keep an eye on it because this is just a 2-mana kill a lot of things if the standard meta can allow it to kill a lot of things, if that makes sense. Next up, a card that is both kind of good, but I think it's more of the janky fun application, Vorpal Sword. 1 black for an artifact equipment. A crit creature gets +2 and has Death Touch. Very nice. But it also has a 8-mana activated ability that says, until end of turn, Vorpal Sword gains whenever a crit creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. And it has a quick cost of 2 black. Okay, first of all, this is just a fun flavor for those who don't know kind of like the flavor story of Vorpal Sword. Basically, to put a long story short, the basic premise that people know with Vorpal Sword is its primary purpose when you're going for the finishing blow is that it cuts heads off. So, very flavorful that it has a Medusa head there, as well that if you can do the finishing blow to your opponent with the activated ability, they lose the game and such. So, fun little flavor there. I could go into full details, but like I said, I'm kind of doing the card analysis here. Do I think this card's good for Standard? I would say potentially, but it's really going to be dependent if a Mardu equipment deck kind of forms. If a Mardu equipment deck forms, then this could actually be a perfect 1-drop in general, because it's a cheap artifact, which then allows yourself to essentially equip it to inevitably, whether or not you use kind of like a sim-buy kind of like way to automatically equip it, whether if you use one card that we're actually going to be talking about soon, but mostly stuff I'm thinking like the Combat Trick in Zendikar, where you target a warrior, and then that target warrior can automatically equip a weapon of your choice. Stuff like that, essentially. But still, there are like other ways you can do this. Like there is also in Kaldheim the 4-drop god that essentially makes it that at the beginning of your combat, you can switch control of equipment and such to target creature or permanent, so there's that. So there's definitely ways to do that. And as for the artifact itself, if we disregard the whole Timmy kind of like win condition of this card, just giving a +2 boost in Death Touch is actually a pretty good aggressive equipment. Like, you're going to make your opponent have a really hard time blocking because they are, whatever they're going to block with, they are going to trade. So if you can attach this to like a first strike or a double strike creature, then it gets really, really, really awkward. So Vorpal Sword, I say it has a chance, but it is definitely one of those where I'm like, yes, the Timmy part of me mostly just wants to play this card to see if we can get to the victory condition. Realistically, it's just a nice cheap artifact that has a really nifty ability, especially if you attach it to the right creature. More or less. Next up, probably one of the more standard playable cards they actually revealed, Prosperous Innkeeper. 1 green for a halfling citizen. It has, when it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So a 2-mana 1/1, but you're essentially getting a 1-mana 1/1 because you're getting the treasure out of it. And it's a Soul Sister, which if you're playing the proper deck that has beneficial life gain synergies and such, or just even then, just have a 2-mana, just 1/1, which then is beneficial with stuff like Questing Beast or not Questing Beast, Lovestruck Beast. I always get those 2 mitts. With Lovestruck Beast in the format, this is just a 2-mana creature that can allow you to be able to attack with your Lovestruck Beast. And then anytime you play your Lovestruck Beast, or play any of your cheap creatures that will trigger Lovestruck Beast, you gain a life out of it. This card actually has ridiculously a lot of good potential in like the token decks that we've been seeing going on in the format stuff. Like, the ones that essentially play a bunch of 1-drops, play Jaspier Sentinels, play the Clarion Spirits, that stuff. This is a card that can actually sneak pretty well into the deck because, first of all, you do get a really cheap 1/1 that helps with the Lovestruck Beast, but you also get the treasure, which then you could use as well as with Jaspier Sentinel to maybe get another 2-drop or another 1-drop, which then if you have the synergies like stuff like Clarion Spirit and such, you get another Spirit, and then just build your board and such, or even use it to ramp. You can even use this in like maybe even a mid-range deck where you're essentially just playing the 2-drop. If it stays alive, great. If not, you're holding on that treasure to maybe ramp into something a lot bigger. Kind of like how people have been discarding like Magma Opus and Creative Outburst in the format just to get that one treasure. So then on turn 4, they can inevitably just play the Goldspan Dragon and stuff like that. That's where really this card kind of like sees its shine. So I'm not sure about Eternal formats, other than maybe in Historic. Maybe you might see some play in the Collected Company, kind of like Life Gain Soul Sister deck. Because it is technically another Soul Sister. Maybe. But overall, I do like this card a lot. This is probably the, at least of the one spoiled so far, probably the one that I'm like, yeah, it's going to just slot into one of the more popular decks in the format relatively well, if I'm being legit honest. Next up, one of the flashier mythics they showed off, Diamat. For those who know, pretty much anytime you play D&D, if you go against this creature, it's either two things. One, you are very, very high leveled and you are just wanting a challenge with your party. Or two, your DM is trolling you. One or the other. Anyway, Tiamat. 2 and rulebook, aka white, blue, black, red, and green for legendary creature Dragon God. It has flying. It has, when Tiamat enters the battlefield, if you cast it, search your library for up to 5 dragon cards, not named Tiamat, that each have different names, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle. Okay, so this is technically a 7 mana 7/7 with flying that could, in theory, draw you up to 5 cards if you have the appropriate deck design. I want to love this card, don't get me wrong. It's very flavorful, it's amazing. We're probably going to get more dragons in the set. We already have good dragons within the meta at the moment. Tiamat is such a tempting card. The problem, though, is we're in this weird meta where technically 7 mana is plausible, but 7 mana is one of those things where you have to use it to quote-unquote win the game. Like, we're speaking stuff like most people use it to cast ultimatums, like Emergent Ultimatum, or essentially Emergent Ultimatum, or the Genesis Ultimatum and stuff, which then theoretically usually will get them into game victory winning conditions. This, on the other hand, gets you a lot of card draw, and you do get a 7/7 fly out of it, but it doesn't necessarily win you the game. Unless you have some way to give this haste, and then just deal 7, and then just have a good time, and then have the dragons to essentially finish off the game, so to speak, if you can survive the turn. So, it's weird. Now, if there's one thing where I think this card is going to see play, it's Commander. I mean, this is obviously a great Commander card, either as your Commander or as the 99. Like, the Scion Ur-Dragon decks are just looking at this card and being like, yes, please, we want one of those in our decks. Drawing up the 5 dragons that we can play with our Scion. Thank you kindly, much appreciated. Other than that, Eternal formats, I would be dumbfounded. Unless we do some Pioneer Fires of Invention shenanigans, I guess. Is Fires of Invention still legal in Pioneer? I don't know. But besides that, I think it's a standard. It's probably, if it has a chance, it's probably in a Dragon Tribal deck, and it's as just a 1, maybe 2 of. But I would be very surprised if it sees play in a competitive deck. Now, are Timmy's going to play this card? Absolutely. It's flavorful. It's one of the big bads in D&D. You're going to probably try to play the Dragon Tribal deck because that will be fun, so I could definitely see people at least trying it out. But still, 7 mana to get this and draw 5 cards, nothing to sneeze at. Also, they did reveal that the basic lands in this set are going to have flavor text, mostly just as kind of like how the D&D introduces the campaign or story of the campaign. Nice flavor, even though I know some people are like a little bit question mark on this. The way I look at it is, hey, we get some watermark cool foils potentially, so that's a way to look at it. Now we get to the cards that actually got revealed, essentially due to the promo video that came out last Friday. So let's start off with the really kind of like fun Planeswalker. Now, one clarification they did say with this, due to the fact that this is, even though a set that's going to be standard legal, with these kind of like Beyond Universes sets, or when they cross over with something, it doesn't really reflect on the Magic the Gathering story, so cool that Lolth Spider Queen is a Planeswalker card, but she is not canonically going to be a Planeswalker. Like, we are not going to see Lolith in a story within, like, a semi, I don't know, an Innistrad or something like that. So, don't worry about that, essentially. Nevertheless, let's talk about the card. 5 mana for Loyalty Planeswalker. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lolth Spider Queen. First of all, that ability is really good. Now let's take a look at its activated abilities. 0 mana, you draw a card and lose 1 life. That's good. -3, create 2/2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach. Not bad. And then -8, you gain an emblem with whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage, keyword combat damage, by 1 or more creatures you control. If that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference. Okay, there's a lot to unpack with this card, but this card is really good. Okay, first of all, just the fact that you get a 5 mana for loyalty Planeswalker that can allow you to automatically defend itself with the spider creature tokens, very nice. Also the fact that they have menace and reach, which helps block it against flyers, since a lot of popular creatures in the format are flyers, that's great. Now, granted, you do have to worry about when your mind's free that it dies to shock or frostbolt or stuff like that, or stomp, so you gotta keep that in mind. But still, it is nice that we have the ability to semi-defend it, especially later in the game when we hopefully hope that we kind of hate out our opponents, kind of like semi, or fish out their stomps, fish out their shock spells and such. So, just having that -3, perfectly nice. But if you do have already defense already set up, just being able to 0 mana, draw a card, and lose 1 life, that's really good, especially in specific decks that want that card draw. Now, granted, 5 mana for it is a little bit steep, but the factor is that you can maybe, if you can at least draw at least 2 cards off this, you'll pretty much get your value out of it. But even then, if you already have a board presence, the best thing about this card is the factor that it's a semi way to help protect against board wipes in a sense. Mostly in a sense that the problem is with aggro or aristocratic decks, essentially, they do try to get to their aristocratic win condition and such, like pinning the opponent and such. The problem is, though, if your opponent has a board wipe and you don't have your stuff out that essentially helps you to pin your opponent, maybe you do, but maybe you haven't set up enough creatures yet, then when the board wipe happens, then you have to kind of rebuild, which is a little bit tricky. With Lost Spider Queen, it does, as long as your opponent's not running a board wipe that deals damage to planeswalkers as well, then you do get value out if your creatures dying from board wipes or spot removal by the loyalty going up on this. And if you can get to the ultimate, which I do think it's actually possible in this format, so something to keep in mind, that ability is kind of nuts when you think about it. Because the way you have to look at this is, if you can deal at least 1 point of combat damage, just 1 point of combat damage, you can literally make your opponent lose 7 life. Let me repeat that again. If you can make your opponent at least get dealt 1 combat damage, like either by with a cheap little 1/1 flyer, or maybe just maybe even just a cheap little unblockable creature, you're literally making sure you deal 8 opponent to the opponent. In a 20 life format, that can be devastating. So yeah, I think Lolth definitely is going to be an auto-inclusion in any aristocrat decks, or at least they are going to try to put it in the aristocrat decks, because it just makes sense. Aristocrat decks already sacrifice their creatures. Their creatures are going to die. You essentially get a loyalty on it. You have ways to create creatures to sacrifice if needed. This card just does a lot. So, yeah, the Spider Queen is going to do some shenanigans. Oh boy, so many aristocratic shenanigans. And of course, there's going to be this. People will try this in the Rakdos aristocrat decks, where you're going to steal your opponent's creature, and then essentially, when you village rights it, you do get a loyalty off Wolf, which is kind of hilarious. So yeah, there's a pretty good chance this card might see some standard play, or at least people are going to try, because it's really cool. Next up, one of the more popular characters in D&D, forgive me of butchering the name, but Drizzit Odin, I think is how you pronounce it. I might be butchering that. I apologize in advance. Anyway, it's a legendary creature Elf Ranger. It's a free with double strike, and then when this creature enters the battlefield, create Gunther. Like I said, I'm going to butcher these names. A legendary 4/1 green cat creature token with trample. Whenever a creature dies, keep in mind it could be your creature or an opponent's creature. If it had power greater than Drizzit's power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on Drizzit equal to the difference. Okay. There's a few ways I'm kind of looking at this. There's one janky application, but there is also kind of like a fun, potentially competitive application of this card. And first, let's talk about the competitive application. If Drizzit is going to see some competitive play, or at least be good for like grinding on ladder, I think its mainstay, it's going to be kind of like in the Selesnya counter decks that we've seen in the format, because it kind of makes sense. It's a good top end. You do get the double strike creature, and then you get the 4/1 trample, which is perfectly fine. But chances are you've already been building up your board presence with creatures with counters on them, maybe some of them that have more power than Drizzit. So then you pretty much create a wider board presence. So then if your opponent does try to spot removal, aka one of their creatures and such, one of your creatures, then what happens is if that creature has higher power than Drizzit, boom, it gets bigger. And then when you can put more counters on it, maybe you have your counter-based synergies, like the one that whenever you put a counter on it, you double the counters, essentially. Then it gets bigger and bigger, and then you can just essentially use it as a very aggressive unit to hopefully close out a game. That's probably the most competitive aspect of Drizzit, other than maybe potentially, maybe if you make Absent Elves a thing, maybe this is a nice top end for that deck, but I think it's more going to be a Selesnya counter deck, if I'm being honest. Now, the more jankier application for Standard that I think this will be kind of fun in, one thing to keep in mind, the way this card works, you get two creatures, one of them has Double Strike and one of them has Trample. There's a card that came out from Strixhaven called Thunderous Orator, which is essentially just a 2/2 with Vigilance, but anytime it attacks, it gets the other ability keywords of creatures you control that are essentially attacking. So, you kind of see where this is going. Then you have not only this as a double striker and then trample creature, but then your Thunderous Orator also would then now have double strike and trample, which is kind of hilarious, actually. Now, could be the potential that this card might be too slow for the format. Potentially. But, I don't know. As for Commander, I think a lot of people will at least try this for Commander, since, like I said, Drizzit is a very, very popular character in D&D lore. Like, I don't know how many books are made of this character, but there's a lot. So I can see some people trying to make a flavor deck where they try to essentially make Drizzit their commander and try to go into maybe the Selesnya counter synergies, or maybe just try to be thematic with the character within its story and such. So I can definitely see that. Nevertheless, do you think the card is... It's fun for Standard, but I don't know if it's going to be like super competitive, other than the potential of it being in the top end for Selesnya counters. But we'll see. And the last card they revealed, and probably the last one they're going to reveal until they do the official spoiler season within, like, probably the late June to early July, I would guess. Bruno Battlehammer. 2 red and a white for a legendary creature Dwarf Warrior. It's a 5/3, pretty aggressive stats. Each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it. And then it has, you may pay 0 rather than pay the equipped cost of the first equip ability you activate this turn. So as I mentioned before with the Vorpal Sword, hey, Bruno can help you actually easily equip the Vorpal Sword to something without having to spend the 2 black on it. So, something to keep in mind. Okay, they've been giving us, for the record, from Zendikar, from Kaldheim, and from even to this D&D set, they've been trying to give us a lot, and I mean legit a lot of cards to try to encourage the equipment deck. Will this card finalize the equipment deck? It has potential. I'll say that. It definitely has potential to finalize it. Mostly just for a few things. One, the factor that its redundancy for the factor that allows you to have free equip spell attachment, essentially. Very nice. It's kind of like a secondary, essentially that 4-cost guard, Horvar. Horvar, I think it's the name of it. God of Battle, essentially. It allows you to get a secondary effect of that, if necessary. And also with Horvar, it's God of Battle. Essentially, the forecast the White God from Kaldheim. I am legit having a brain fart on the name. But essentially, this actually synergizes well with Bruno Battlehammer kind of ridiculously well because you could essentially, with both cards on the battlefield, you can essentially take all your equipments, attach it to one creature, maybe that is very evasive and such, and give it a significant power boost because since each creature you control gets +2 for each equipment attached to it. So if you attach like free equipment you have on the battlefield controlled onto one creature, that's a +6 attack boost. That can be very, very, very silly. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, just the factor that it's a Dwarf Warrior, something to keep in mind. Those archetypes do matter, especially in the equipment archetype, since from both Kaldheim as well as Zendikar, we have seen a heavy emphasis on the Warrior archetype being equipment based, and we've seen a heavy emphasis on the Dwarf being equipment based as well. So, there's definitely people going to be trying this out, because yet again, one of the popular characters in D&D lore, people are definitely going to give it a shot. But I do think this actually has a chance. I do think this has a very, very slim chance to actually see play in Standard, especially if we can finally get the equipment deck to work. Besides that, I guess if Winota wants to try to an equipment-based synergy, maybe. But in Winota, there were probably better cards, so I'm definitely going to keep my eye on this. I do think this is probably the second place of the card that's probably the most standard viable that has potential at the very least. I'm definitely going to keep an eye on it. Nevertheless, that's the cards that have been spoiled from the new D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set so far. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed the future Top Deck Thoughts where we talk about Modern Horizons, as well as the preview card that I'll be previewing on June 1st at 8 o'clock on Twitch, as well as showing the preview, pretty much video that I have for it. Nevertheless, I hope you all have a lovely day. This is LevDev, signing out. Bada beep, bada boop.